Today, we're going to spend a little time considering how Unitarian Universalist values play out in our lives. We center our values around what we call our 7 principles. They're on the back of your order of service. I will also try to connect to how our denomination, like all denominations, falls short of its values because we are a denomination made up of human beings. And how this all starts getting woven in to these suggested changes to our Unitarian Universalist principles. Lastly, I'll stay up here after the service. I have a handout for you, and I'll do a little Q&A about how you select delegates to vote in June. And the other part of her story I'm really struck about is how important delegates are. It was the delegates at the General Assembly who went to the leadership and said, hey, this is not acceptable. We want you to rethink this ball and do something different. These are the common folk from our congregations who become delegates. So she wrote that piece in 2017, and obviously she's looking back. It was 25 years after the Jeffersonian Ball. So haven't things gotten better? Well, I do think things have gotten better. I think we're trying to be more aware, and we're doing a lot of self-discovery, and we're doing a lot of reading, and we're doing a lot better about listening to all different kinds of voices from all different places and experiences. However, I will tell you, in Spokane in 2018, at a time actually right before the General Assembly. And for those of you who are newer to Unitarian Universalism and you've never been to a General Assembly, this is something we do every year. And people come from all over the country. They come from Canada. Sometimes they come from countries outside, other countries outside. Somewhere between 2,500 and 6,000 people will gather. And it is an overwhelming, joyful, sort of indescribable experience. And you go home with all these thoughts in your mind. If you ever go to General Assembly, travel with others so you can do this all the way back. So at General Assembly in Spokane, and I actually know some people in this congregation were there, but 3 days before that assembly, the ministers and religious professionals gather for what we call ministry days. And we listen to new thoughts from headquarters, which is Boston. We attend amazing worship. We take workshops on stewardship and inclusion, church growth, on Unitarian Universalist history. And because I'm a West Coast UU, I find our East Coast UU history rather fascinating. And much of what we learn and experience, we try to take back to congregations we serve. It's a building time, skill building time. It's a lot of collegial fun. You get to spend time with people you went to seminary with. But it is a time of really deep reflection. So there I am in Spokane in 2018. I'm not credentialed yet as a minister, so I'm kind of in awe of it all. There was this wonderful worship service. I mean, it started out wonderfully. And the sermon was about Unitarian churches who used covenanting in tandem with congregational polity. I don't expect you to know what that means. But they used promises to one another instead of having to answer to the hierarchy because they were pulling away. They didn't want the Anglican church model. They wanted something different. So the speaker is talking about the Boston area, talking about Massachusetts in the late 1600s and the early 1700s. So guess what's also going on in Massachusetts during that time? Yes, the rumblings of the revolution are starting to happen, and she mentions that, but it's the genocide of Native Americans, including, I can tell you, a horrendous piece of history where people were boarded into their homes and their village was set on fire. The Native American village was set on fire. I am acutely aware that Native American religious professionals in our denomination had been asking for their history to be included as we recounted UU history. They had specifically asked over years with multiple voices. Our leadership promised that would happen, but it didn't happen. And again, it didn't happen. So there were several Native American women sitting a few rows up to my right. And as I was watching this service unfold, I was watching the emotions on their faces. So the service extolled this incredibly positive image of the white church during that time, with very little mention of anything else going on other than these kind of seeds toward revolutionary thought. It was devastating to the Native Americans who were in the room. It's I was going to say quieter, but maybe it's not quieter, but equally tragic and painful example of what Rebecca Savage experienced with the Jeffersonian ball. I'm not going to use her words, but she is reflecting about bigger things in Unitarian Universalist than just her experience or just this Spokane experience. She's talking about looking decades back, and she says, I grieve for all the hurts during this time that our history has caused. I grieve for those who left our UU communities because of how things are handled. It broke trust in finding spacious rest in our congregations from pervasive violent racism in our country. I grieve for those who at the time were unable to traverse the gaps in their spiritual understanding of justice and belonging. I grieve that it has taken this long to have the conversation about centering people of color, to put primacy on whiteness as the default setting in how we see our experience and our world means we are being theologically inconsistent. We covenant to affirm and promote the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part, and yet we devalue the full inclusion of so many. End of quote. And I really want us to think more broadly than race here. I want us to think different age groups, different sexual preferences, different identities, different life experiences. I want us to really broaden our thinking. And now I want to weave in from the side. I can never remember what's the word, but no, I don't know. So let's weave in why is there a commission that is called the Article 2 Commission. And it's asking us to vote on this rewrite of our Unitarian Universalist principles and sources, and a few other things. So the principles and the sources are in the back of your order of service. If you're on the live stream, they're on our website. So this commission, which we call Article 2 for short, the Article 2 Commission wants us to rethink having love at our center. The commission, I preached about this when I was surprised to see it was almost exactly a year ago. But I want to give you a little update. And if you missed the sermon last year, I'm going to try to give this to you in a nutshell. Our Unitarian Universalist Association has bylaws. And when you become a fellowship of the UUA, you sign on to be governed by those bylaws. That's part of the process. We're also allowed tremendous autonomy in individual fellowships and churches. But the bylaws should be reviewed every 15 years, is what they say, and we were due for a review. We were actually overdue. And the last time the bylaws were changed is when we added the 7th principle and the 6th source, so the interdependent web, and then the 6th source, which is paganism. So Article 2, our denomination back in Boston, the board said, all right, we're going to create this Article 2 study commission. We're going to let them go in there, look at Article 2, and see if they recommend changes. So the commission did many surveys and workshops and publications, and then they made recommendations. And I think it's very unfortunate that the workshops and the study and the surveys, that was all happening during COVID. And I think that's when we were all just trying to navigate parts of our life. And I think for a lot of people, this just sort of went by them because we had bigger fish to fry at the time, right? And so I think it's tragic that timing was paired in the way it was. So after collecting all that information, and they had tens of thousands of pieces of data, they wrote recommendations. And then last year at the General Assembly, those of us who were delegates, over 85% of the people voted to have another year of deeper consideration and study. There were also amendments made at the time, and they were woven into the new recommendations that just came out a few weeks ago. Our sources got reworded in a way that I think is gorgeous, and the rewording of the sources actually came from a lot of the amendments from the floor. So I'm going to read the sources to you first, and you heard part of them in my introduction this morning, and I would invite you to just close your eyes. Direct experiences of transcending mystery and wonder are primary sources of Unitarian Universalist inspiration. These experiences open our hearts, renew our spirits, and transform our lives. We draw upon and are inspired by sacred, secular, and scientific understandings that help us make meaning and live into our values. These sources ground us and sustain us in ordinary, difficult, and joyous times. We respect the histories, the contexts, and the cultures in which these sources were created and are currently practiced. Grateful for the experiences that move us, aware of the religious ancestries we inherit, and enlivened by the diversity which enriches our faith. We are called to ever deepen and ever expand our wisdom. You can open your eyes, although I'm going to ask you to close them again in a couple minutes. I think what I love about these the most, I don't know, there's so many things I love about that paragraph. I love the way it's beyond an intellectual knowing. It so validates the experiences that we all have with mystery and with science and with awe and with all the different things that shape our faith. And it cannot be exclusionary with that wording. It's not Jewish traditions or Christian traditions or pagan traditions. In no way does it exclude anything. And you'll notice if you flip over in the back of the order service, there's no mention of Buddhism in our current sources. So the rewrite, you can be pagan, you can be humanist, you can be Christian. It's all about how you take in these experiences that shape your life. So I know I can vote for that one. Unfortunately, it's all together. You don't get to vote for it piecemeal. Rats. As for the change from our current principles, I want us to try a little exercise. Currently, our first Unitarian principle does not have an explicit expectation of grounding in love at its center. It reads that we covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So I want you to close your eyes again. And I want you to think about a person you find difficult. Probably not the most horrendous, difficult person in your life, or not a person you don't feel emotionally or physically safe with, but just someone you really struggle with. Perhaps they're a micromanager, and you're a go with the flow, or the other way around. Maybe their politics are polar opposites of yours, and they really like to tell you about it. Do they mutually select projects with you and then never pull their weight? Perhaps they critique everything when critique is not even needed. Maybe their style vexes you in a way you can't really quite put your finger on. Just hold their face or their words in your mind. And then think about covenanting to affirm and promote their inherent worth and dignity. What would that look like in your situation? What would it mean to the situation? And now I want to add some more descriptive thoughts. Can you covenant or promise, if you don't like the word covenant, can you embrace the differences and commonalities with love, with curiosity, with respect? If the person is of a different faith, orientation, race, cultural group, can you bring forth an understanding that both of you are doing your best to manage in a changing world? And that your situation is never going to be perfect? Will you promise or covenant with yourself to bring forth generosity? A generosity that connects us to one another in interdependence and mutuality. Are you willing to commit time, wisdom, attention, and love to creating a better situation? So when you're ready, you can just flutter your eyes back open. First and foremost, I just want you to take away from that experience what you need to take away. But in a rhetorical question, I am wondering if your thought process expanded. Did your generosity expand as I added on that additional language beyond inherent worth and dignity? It did for me when I tried this a couple of times earlier this week. The expanding language allowed me to think more deeply and really more specifically about how I interact with others. The others that vex me in my personal life, in the greater community. You'll be happy to know none of you vex me. Seriously. The expanded language just allowed me to think about maybe starting points with empathy and how I could put love at the center and how I could commit myself to the process of taking it on. So what I've just done is added on the words from the new principles. That was part of that visualization, because I wanted you to actually experience them. So this June, at our association's General Assembly, which happens to be all online this year, It will require a 2/3 vote to put our current principles into history, which doesn't mean we need to tear them off our wall. It just means something will be added, and usher in a new expression, which will be interdependence, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, and justice, with love at the center. And I would imagine you don't know, those happen to be the Soul Matters themes this year, which I thought was sneaky of them. I didn't even figure that out at first until we'd done a couple months of them. I'm like, wait, these are really familiar to me, and this is why. So it's the belief and hope that the new wording will make it easier for us to be mindful of the standards by which we want to live our lives, the ways in which we want to treat other people. Not a golden rule, which is how we want to do something for them, but a platinum rule, which is what they want from us. And here's what it sounds like. And I've broken these are principles, but I've broken them into 2 different sections. The first line in one section, the second line comes later. We honor the interdependent web of all existence. With reverence for the great web of life and with humility, we acknowledge our place in it. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture and experience and theology. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We adapt to a changing world. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worth. These principles, the second sentence in every one of these asks something really tangible of us. Practice in the day-to-day living of our lives. I broke them into these 2 sentences because they hit me differently when I do that. So our current principles have the language that we covenant to affirm and promote. However, we almost always leave that sentence out. It is on the back of your order service, but we never talk about that before we say one of our principles, because they do start with, we covenant to affirm and promote. So in the new ones, we're not really adding anything new regarding covenant language. And I'm saying we covenant to protect the earth and all its beings from exploitation. We will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care, respect, mutuality, and justice. We will work to repair harm and damaged relationships. Learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of the inclusive democratic process to make decisions within our congregations, our association, and our society at large. Collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. An openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, our presence, and our resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. We covenant to use our time, our wisdom, our attention, and our money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. So the vote will be in June of 2024. UUFB can have 3 voting delegates, and the number of delegates is based on the size. This year, General Assembly is all virtual. We don't pay anything to have delegates register and go through that. There's several hours that go on for the voting process. So they get to vote on the change in the bylaws and the initiatives at no cost to us. Hopefully that makes it easier for smaller congregations to be represented. So I am really hoping that you will select your 3 delegates. I don't quite know what our process for that is. I know people can volunteer, people can be suggested. The board actually has to approve the delegates. So what I'm asking you to do is spend a little more time on this before you decide how to vote. I have handouts of the new ones with all the changes that happened last June, but it just came out a couple weeks ago. So I'll have those up here. So just spend some time with them and an open mind. I struggle with the language. I think there's too much in them. But I really like that they ask more of me and they ask very specific things that I can sort of wrap my head around. It's like, oh, this is how I want to live out my values. These are phrases that are meaningful to me. So I think you'll just spend some time with these over the next few weeks, and then you get to tell your delegates how you want the votes casted. And this is a really big deal. I know it doesn't sound like it sometimes. It's like, oh, this stuff happens off in Boston. Yeah, so what? But it's going to impact Unitarian Universalism for years to come. So I will just let you do your process. I can answer questions after the service and come up and get the handouts after we're done today. Amen.